My brother claimed my business was successful because he gave me advice. He crashed my party, then assaulted me, so I got him sent to jail. It's always tough to think objectively once some nonsense goes down and family is involved. That's why I'd like to get an outside opinion on this. I am a 28-year-old male, an entrepreneur who runs a pretty successful small business. I don't bring in millions, but I do turn a healthy profit. I'm doing pretty well with something that I started from an account. My brother, Mike, is 30 years old. He isn't a business owner, not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's relevant. He does okay for himself, he works a nice job, and as far as I could tell, he's always been content. Ever since we were kids, we've always gotten along pretty well. We were best friends, more or less, and we confided in each other over everything. I guess that turned out to be my first mistake. I have an engineering background, and 3D printing has always been a hobby of mine. My company came about from an account I had, where I shared my 3D printed creations. Some of them were just figurines of 3D sculpts I designed, and others were useful tools like car and desk accessories. The accessories aren't just simple prints. They're rather complicated mechanically, and a few weeks of planning go into a lot of them. It turned out that there was a lot of demand for these accessories, so I started selling them. It was a decent side income for a while, until demand started skyrocketing and there was no way for me to keep up with the printing myself. That was when I contacted a manufacturer and looked into the logistics of mass-producing these things. It was around this time that I started discussing my plans with my brother. As I said, we always confided in each other, and I didn't see any way this could come back to bite me in the butt. I'd bounce ideas off of him, and he'd give me feedback. Sometimes it was genuinely helpful, but most times it didn't amount to much. That didn't really matter, though. A lot of the time, just talking to him helped me think out loud and get my thoughts in order. I need to point out that the core business idea was all mine. He didn't come up with any of my products or help me develop them. He didn't know the first thing about 3D printing, and he didn't have the mechanical knowledge needed to help me figure out how these accessories would work. So imagine my surprise when I found out he had been telling people that he'd given me advice that made me successful. The first time this happened was at a family barbecue, nearly a year ago. I was moving around the yard, trying to make sure everyone's needs were met. The mood was chill, and everyone was having a good time. My Uncle Terry was working the grill, and my brother was talking to him. I grabbed a couple of beers and went over to chat with him a bit. I just caught the end of their discussion, but I heard Terry mention something about my business. By that point, things were going pretty well. I was mass-producing merchandise and turning a decent profit. I handed them the cans and asked what they were discussing, just trying to make conversation. Terry answered and said that Mike was telling him about how he'd helped me develop my bestseller. I just chuckled and said, "Really? I thought it was a joke." My best-selling product is a particularly complicated piece that took me 4 months of research and prototyping to figure out. Obviously, he didn't help me with any of that. He's an accountant with no real knowledge of how to develop, test, and manufacture that kind of product. But Mike jumped in and said, "Come on, man. You know you couldn't have done it without my help." He grinned at me, and I was left trying to figure out whether he meant that or if it really was a joke, like I'd originally suspected. Terry just laughed and said, "We shouldn't fight over it," and that was that. I forgot about the incident for a while. It really just did seem like some good-natured ribbing, so I didn't let it bother me. I forgot about it until a few months later when we were having another family get-together. This time, I was talking with one of my cousins about my products. He asked when I was going to be releasing something new. I made a joke about how I needed some more time to work out the bugs with the prototype, and my brother walked over and threw his arm around my shoulder. He smiled and said, "Remember, if you need any help working out the kinks again, I'm always here." As usual, when he said that, I remembered the first instance and I started to wonder if he was genuinely trying to claim credit for my creations. I tried to handle the situation diplomatically, so I laughed and said, "I'll figure it out. I always do in the end." His voice got louder, and he said that I usually got there after he gave me some help. At that point, the atmosphere in the room was getting a bit awkward. The party was falling silent, and people were starting to look at us. That was when I noticed he wasn't so steady on his feet. He'd had more than a few drinks, and he clearly wasn't handling them well. He didn't seem completely drunk, but he was more than just a little buzzed. I've never seen the sense in trying to argue with someone who's intoxicated, so I decided to try and keep things light. "Mike, you know my designs are my babies. I wouldn't want to put you on the spot. if people started asking questions about them. I hoped he could pick up the message I was trying to slip in there. He didn't know the first thing about how these designs worked, and he'd look like a fool if I asked him even a few questions. Maybe he understood what I was getting at, or maybe he didn't, but he seemed to take the hint. He stopped talking about helping me with my designs and started mentioning the advice he gave me. I didn't want to cause a scene, so I agreed that he had supported me when I needed it, and we left it at that. The atmosphere got less tense, and everybody went back to what they'd been doing before. After the party, we didn't speak for a few days. I was expecting him to text me with an apology, explaining that he was drunk when he said those things. But when no apology came, it became clear to me that he really believed this. Drunk words are sober thoughts, or so they say. I decided to take the first step in sorting out this mess. I texted him and told him that I appreciated him being a listening ear when I needed one. But I pointed out that he couldn't claim to be responsible for my success. I told him I appreciated his role in my journey, but the bulk of the hard work, the real labor, had been done solely by me. I let him know that I appreciated his support, along with the support of every other family member and friend who had helped me along the way. He didn't reply to my text until the next day, and when he did, it was just with the rolling eyes emoji. I stared at my phone for a few minutes, expecting a follow-up message, something more substantial. But that was it. That stupid emoji told me all I needed to know. He was dismissing everything I said, and that pissed me off royally. But I decided I wasn't going to push it any further. I simply wouldn't talk to him anymore. After that, he clearly didn't respect my boundaries, so there was no point in trying to make him see things my way. For the next few months, we barely spoke. I focused on growing my business, and I eventually launched my new product. It performed better than I ever expected, and the first batch was sold out within a week. The success grew from there, it went viral on social media, and that brought a lot of attention to the rest of my store. Demand pretty much doubled overnight. That bit of success made my family take more of an interest in my work. They were fully supportive, except for Mike. I didn't hear a thing from him, and honestly, I kind of preferred it that way. I knew he couldn't possibly take the credit for this product because we weren't talking through most of the development process. But I didn't want to give him a chance to try. It turned out that I didn't have to give him a chance because he was content spreading lies behind my back. Now, it started when my dad called me and said that he had something important to talk to me about. He said it in such a solemn way that I kind of got worried. To make things worse, he refused to tell me what it was about until we met in person. I was half expecting some, "I have 6 months to live" type news. Fortunately, it wasn't that, but it wasn't good news either. When I drove down to meet my dad, he was waiting for me with my mom and my brother. My dad told me that Mike had complained to him that I was trying to deny his contribution to my company. Worse still, he told my dad that he believed he was owed compensation. I wish I could say I stayed diplomatic, but that was the last straw for me. I asked my parents if they honestly believed him when he said he was responsible for my success. My dad stayed silent, but my mom said, "Everyone knows you guys talk about this stuff all the time." She added that it was pretty obvious that he had contributed to some degree to my success, and the rest of the family thought so as well. That was where I got mad. "You've been telling the rest of the family this crap." Mike looked me right in the eye and said he didn't think there was any harm in talking to people about his contributions. I was so mad that I practically started sputtering. My dad told me to calm down, and I said I was making a big deal out of nothing. These designs in my company are accomplishments I'm very proud of, and I told them that I didn't appreciate having my achievements reduced to the results of someone else's input. I told Mike that I was sick of his lies. I pointed out that he didn't know the first thing about 3D printing or product design. I told him he should send out a message to everybody retracting his statements, or I would do it myself, and I assured him that I wouldn't use polite language to do so. My parents tried to get me to calm down, but I was too worked up to listen to them. I just stormed off and drove back home. They've called me a few times, but I haven't answered any of their calls yet. Mike hasn't made any attempts to get in touch, and I doubt he's actually going to clear things up with our relatives. Am I the a-hole here? My business is important to me, but is my family right? Am I really just overreacting? Oh, you're not the a-hole here at all, OP. If anything, you're being too kind. It sounds like your brother has a real talent for creative storytelling, and by that I mean lying through his teeth, but sadly, not much of a knack for anything beyond that. Update. In my last post, I got a lot of responses saying I was making a big deal out of nothing just a few weeks after I was railroaded into our little family meeting. Things got worse, though. I don't know who put these stupid ideas in Mike's head, but he sent me a letter threatening legal action. He claimed that he was entitled to a portion of my profits because I used his intellectual contributions. It obviously wasn't a legal letter, but it was written to seem official. I guess he thought I wasn't experienced with this kind of thing, and that an official-looking letter would be enough to scare me into settling. Fortunately, I have a lawyer I talk to about all legal issues surrounding my products and business. If Mike was really as involved in my business as he claimed to be, then he'd know that I got my lawyer to take a look at it, and he just laughed and told me there was nothing to be worried about. But he advised me to resolve the issue with my brother, because he could be stupid enough to take it to court. He explained that even though we both knew there was no case, getting dragged down to court would cost me time and money that would negatively affect my business. Getting a lawyer involved was already expensive enough without heading to court, but I wasn't going to settle with my brother. I called him to try and hash things out one last time. I told him I received his letter and that I wasn't going to be intimidated into handing him any money. I let him know that my lawyer had looked at it and that I was ready to take this to court if necessary, but I'd prefer not to. He tried to cut me off, saying he was just fighting for what he was owed, but I wasn't having it. I told him he hadn't contributed to my business in any way that entitled him to a single cent, and that I wasn't going to let him rewrite history to profit off of me. I told him that if he really thought he could prove his contributions in court, then we would let a judge decide. Before he could interrupt me, I pointed out that I had records of all my prototypes, emails, and project notes, and that none of them had any input from him. He was quiet after that, but he just repeated that he was ready to fight me over this. When he saw I wasn't going to budge, he tried different tactics, saying money changed me, that I was tearing our family apart. I pointed out that he was the one spreading stories to our family. He had ambushed me with our parents, and he was the one who had threatened legal action first. He had nothing to say, so I just told him to expect a response from my lawyer and ended the call. After that, I had my lawyer draft a letter threatening to countersue him for damages and defamation if he continued trying to undermine my business with false claims. I forwarded the letter to him, and it seemed like it worked. I didn't hear anything about court or compensation from him again. It didn't stop him from talking behind my back, though. Mike continued spreading his side of the story to anyone who would listen. Now, I had relatives treating me differently and giving me odd looks. Some of them told me that he had been telling family members that I was stuck up or that I'd sold out now that I was successful. Now he was adding the fun little twist of my legal threat, but he was conveniently leaving out the fact that he had threatened me with legal action first. When my aunt pulled me aside to ask if I couldn't just make peace with Mike and be the bigger person, I decided enough was enough. This wouldn't go away if I gave him credit or the payout that he wanted. I called my lawyer to help me draft a formal address to the family. I was going to set the record straight, and I had the hard evidence I needed to do it. My lawyer and I spent hours going through my prototypes, research notes, and messages with engineer friends who had been part of my brainstorming and testing sessions. Each document was time-stamped, showing that all ideas and designs were fully mine. There was zero contribution from my brother. The letter laid out the timeline of my business journey and showed photos of initial prototypes, blueprints, and even emails with my manufacturer. I also attached copies of conversations I'd had with Mike, all of which were abstract discussions in which he hadn't provided any actual feedback. I sent the letter along with the supporting documents to key family members, anyone who I knew would spread the word, and those who seemed to have taken Mike's side. I wanted them to see that his claims were baseless and that his attempts to turn me into the black sheep were based on lies. The letter more or less worked how I wanted it to. Some family members were surprised by the depth of the evidence and reached out to apologize for not understanding sooner. Some were more hesitant to admit that they were wrong, but the letter left little room for doubt. A few of them insisted that I should still pay him for his brotherly support, but I just ignored those. I knew I couldn't win everyone over all at once. I felt like a weight had been lifted off my back. Mike never got in contact to apologize or threaten me further, but I heard he'd still been trying to complain to some family members. My dad told me that nobody was really paying any attention to him anymore. It was smooth sailing until my birthday came around. I'm not normally a birthday guy, but I decided I was going to throw myself a nice party this time around. I wanted to celebrate the recent success of my business. And honestly, I felt like my life was finally taking the direction I'd always wanted for it. I sent out invitations to friends and family who had supported me, and I had not invited my brother. We hadn't spoken in a while, and he hadn't reached out with an apology of any sort. I didn't want him around to ruin the mood. I made it clear to my parents that Mike wasn't invited. They really weren't happy about that, but they didn't put up much of a fight. The party turned out to be fantastic. I had a few good friends who went all out and put together a few surprises that really made the night special for me. Guess who had to show his face, though? One of my friends told me there was a little commotion at the entrance to the venue when I went to check it out. I found my brother arguing with security, insisting that he was too important to keep out. He was shouting that he was my brother and my business partner, which set me off. He was still going on about this utter fantasy that he played a major role in my business. Everyone in the family knew he was a liar, and he was still making a fool of himself. I realized that he was never going to stop this game of his. At that moment, I realized that I didn't have the energy to keep going along with it and hoping that he would come to his senses. I was done with him. I told the security man to kick him out. He blew up at me and exploded, screaming and calling me a scoundrel who didn't take care of the people in his life. I told him to shut up and said that I didn't want anything to do with him. I said that I didn't care if he was jealous of me or if he was mad at me because he felt he hadn't done anything with his life or whatever feelings had made him try to steal credit and drag me down. I was done listening to him whine. I said I didn't want to see him and he was banned from any future events that I organized. Then I turned my back on him and headed back to enjoy the party, but my peace was short-lived. I got word that I was needed in the parking lot. The first thing that came to mind was that one of my guests was having issues parking or getting in. Big surprise, my brother was making a butt of himself again. There was a small crowd of people surrounding him, right beside my car. 2 people were restraining him, and he was trying to break free to get closer to my car. That was when I noticed the tire iron in his hand, and then the crack on my car's rear window. He was struggling to swing at my car again, and now my blood was boiling. All the frustration he'd been piling on me turned to rage, and I shouted, "What's your problem?" When he saw me coming closer, he stopped struggling and dropped the tire iron. I think the guys restraining him took that to mean he wasn't a threat anymore, because they let him go. At that point, I was a few feet away from him, and I didn't have much time to react. When he swung at me, I was slow to duck back, but I managed to get back enough that the punch rocked my chin instead of landing clean on my face. I was so angry I didn't give him a chance to try and hit me again. I just tackled him to the ground and hit him back. I'd only hit him once before I felt hands pulling me off of him, and I realized that he was already out cold. I'd never been in a fight before, and I remember being surprised that someone could get knocked out so easily. Within a minute, he was already waking up. I sat on the curb icing my chin while we waited for the cops to show up. I'd insisted on calling them. He showed up uninvited, damaged my car, and attacked me. I was done going easy on him. Once they arrived, took statements, and drove Mike away, the mood had been ruined. I found it hard to enjoy the rest of the night, but I did my best. It felt like a matter of principle to not let him ruin the rest of my party. The next few days were a whirlwind. I had to deal with my parents, who were pissed at me because of Mike's arrest. I had to point out to them that he had escalated things every step of the way, and this time he had taken it to dangerous levels. My dad said I overreacted by calling the police, but I insisted that vandalizing my car and assaulting me had gone beyond the family drama level. After pressing charges, I focused on protecting myself and my business. I got a restraining order to keep him away from me and any events I might host in the future. The legal proceedings aren't going too great for him, and he's already been mandated to pay for the damages to my car. The silver lining in all of this is that I haven't heard a single word from anybody about him claiming credit for my business. He doesn't talk to me anymore either, which is fine with me. All in all, I'm starting to have some degree of normalcy back in my life, and I love it. Some of my family members still think my response was too extreme, but I'm protecting my peace of mind. Wow, showing up at a party he wasn't invited to and then going after your car, and you is next level delusional. You did what you had to do, and honestly, the restoring order sounds like a smart move to protect both your safety and sanity. It's unfortunate that some family members can't see the full picture, but you deserve to finally enjoy the success you've built without all that toxic noise.